Okay, we are going to be doing the World History, World War I, and Russian Revolution test review, Chapter 14. The test will be tomorrow, Friday, February 15th, so be prepared. Be looking over your notes and things, maybe old quizzes as well, but we're going to talk about the review right now. You should have the review sheet in front of you, so let's get into it. Causes leading to the war. There was militarism, which is a buildup of troops and supplies to prepare for war. A buildup of troops and supplies to prepare for war. Part of militarism is starting conscription, which is a military draft. You need soldiers in order to prepare for war, and so they had a conscription, a military draft. Mobilization is the movement of troops. This is considered an act of war. When you can see troops on the move, other nations take this as an indication that war is about to begin. So mobilization is the movement of troops, considered an act of war. Another cause leading to war is nationalism, which is a pride for one's country. If I haven't beaten that into your head yet, I don't know what to do differently. But nationalism is a pride in one's country. This was especially spread in Slavic areas of the Balkan region. They had many different nationalities and ethnicities, and so nationalism spread in these Slavic areas of the Balkan regions. Now remember, the Balkans are under control of the Ottomans, the Austrians. These are all different religions. These are different ethnic backgrounds, and different nationalities. And so nationalism was definitely a cause leading to war. Imperialism, which we talked about last chapter, is competition for land abroad. This is also part of the reasons for war. The Balkans. The Balkan region is this kind of peninsular area of southern Europe, and they were the powder keg, the spark that ignited World War I. This is a volatile region, and they were the powder keg. It was just the spark that ignited World War I. It's down in the Balkans that the assassination happens. The assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, the Austro-Hungarian heir, on June 28, 1914. So, on June 28, 1914, the assassination of the next in line Austro-Hungarian heir, Archduke Ferdinand, is just that spark that's needed to start the war. In the Balkans is Serbia. Serbia was angered over the Archduke's visit to the Balkan region. They believed that Sarajevo should be under Serbian control, not Austrian control. He's going down there because Sarajevo, was Austro-Hungarians' control, but Serbian nationalists believe that it should be under their control. Gavrilo Princip, he's a young Serbian nationalist. He's part of the Black Hand group, and he's the one who pulls the trigger and assassinates Archduke Francis Ferdinand. He's the young Serbian nationalist, part of the Black Hand, and he's the one who assassinates the Archduke. And so now, quickly, nations are going to form together. And we have some alliances forming. The Central Powers. They were known as the Triple Alliance. Germany, Kaiser William supported Austria against Serbia. So Germany is part of the Central Powers. Austria-Hungary. They are the first to declare war. after the assassination, part of the Central Powers, or at that time we call them the Triple Alliance. Italy, they left the Triple Alliance and joined the Entente, May 1915. So Italy originally was part of the Triple Alliance. They left the alliance and joined the Entente, May 1915. And the Ottomans, they were the sick man of Europe. They lost great amounts of land. It was the Ottomans who helped stop the British Navy at Gallipoli, which never happens. But the Ottomans were not a strong force, but they did join the Central Powers. The Allies were known as the Triple Entente, and then later become known as the Allies. France. Most of the fighting along the Western Front happened on French land in the trenches. So France was an ally. Russia was part of the Triple Entente. Kind of the allies, we could say, to a point, although we'll talk about when Russia leaves the war. So Russia supported Serbia and was the first to mobilize troops in the Eastern Front. Russia supported Serbia and was the first to mobilize troops in the Eastern Front. Great Britain, they were provoked into war when Germany invaded Belgium. They were provoked into war when Germany invaded Belgium. Belgium was trying to remain neutral. Great Britain gets involved when Germany goes through Belgium on their way to France. I'd like you to know that T.E. Lawrence, he was a British officer. T.E. Lawrence led Arab forces against the Ottomans. The famous movie Lawrence of Arabia is based on how he was able to get Ottoman princes to revolt against their own empire, which is why we call the Ottomans the sick man of Europe. If your own people are revolting against you, you probably have a lot of problems in your empire. The U.S. becomes involved. U.S. involvement, they entered in 1917 after the sinking of the Lusitania and the discovery of the Zimmerman Note about Mexico's involvement. U.S. involvement, they entered in 1917 after the sinking of the Lusitania. Remember that British cruiser, that British liner that was going from New York to England. And the discovery of the Zimmerman Note about Mexico's involvement in the war. It's U.S.'s involvement that turned the tide in favor of the Allies. U.S. joining the Allies turned the tide in favor of a victory for the Allies. On the Western Front, there was a stalemate on both sides. It led to huge casualties and very little progress, which is what made the war drag on much longer than it probably should have. A stalemate on both sides led to huge casualties and little progress. New technology made warfare more destructive. Tanks, machine guns, poison gas, Zeppelin, U-boats. All this new technology made warfare more destructive, especially machine guns in the trenches, but tanks, machine guns, poison gas, the Zeppelin, U-boats. Trench warfare was the battleground for about 3 years, and part of the reason for this stalemate. Very little, you would leave your trench. Most often, you stayed in your trench. This resulted in a lot of casualties in the trenches, but little progress was made in when you're talking about seizing territory away from the enemy. When we talk about trench warfare, we talk a lot about no man's land, this area in between trenches. Few went into no man's land because machine guns made advancing impossible. So no man's land was the area in between trenches. Few people went in there because machine guns made advancing possible. And when the call came to go up and over, chances were really good that you were going to get mowed down by machine guns, which is why there was not a lot of advancement. Battles. Few that I want you to know. The Battle of the Marne. Remember, the Marne is a river in France. It's going to dump into the English Channel. This is where the first battle starts. When Germany invades through Belgium to get into France, the first time they meet resistance is with the French army at the Marne. The German army is stopped in northern France. The Second Battle of the Marne is the end of the war. So the German army is stopped in northern France, both times, both at the First Battle of the Marne and the Second Battle of the Marne. It's kind of like bookends. The First Battle of the Marne began the war. The Second Battle of the Marne ends the war. And both times, the German army is stopped right there. And it's the second one that they finally concede. This was their last great kind of push and advancement, or try for advancement, and they did not succeed. The Battle of the Somme, another river in northern France. It was the deadliest battle of World War I. Over 1 million soldiers are killed. Killed, not even captured or wounded. No casualties. 1 million are killed. And there was no clear success. No one won. The Battle of Gallipoli. This is a naval battle. Allied and British Navy was defeated and stopped from progressing north through the Balkan Peninsula. So down in Gallipoli, if you can picture down kind of by Greece, by the Greek islands, near Turkey, the Allied British Navy was defeated and stopped from progressing north through the Balkan Peninsula. The Russian Revolution erupted during World War I because of a lack of leadership and starvation. The Russian Revolution erupted during World War I because of a lack of leadership and starvation. They were using soldiers who were not well trained. Those who were left behind had very little food. There was economic downturn. The Tsar was not wise, leading troops that he had no business leading. And so because of all the things that were happening simultaneously in the war, Russia goes through their own revolution. The Tsar and Rasputin. Nicholas II and the Tsarina were influenced by this holy man. Rasputin had a lot of charisma and personality, and both Nicholas II and the Tsarina were influenced by this holy man. And I use that term very lightly. He was probably a mystic, probably some sort of influential power, but whether or not he was a spiritual, religious holy man leaves a lot of room for interpretation. The Bolsheviks, these are the communists. They seized power after the Tsar's military and economic crisis. Bolsheviks were the communists. They seized power after the Tsar's military and economic crisis. They saw an opportunity. Remember, the word Bolshevik means majority. Ironically, they were the minority, but they saw an opportunity to take over power and kind of usurp the Tsar during this time of great chaos and economic instability in Russia. And so the communists took over power. Lenin. He was a Marxist leader. He was the Marxist leader of the Bolshevik Party. He was the one who seized control, led the revolution. He was awful. He was terrible. He's a Marxist leader of the Bolshevik Party, seized control, and led the revolution. Trotsky was a Soviet leader in Petrograd. He builds up the Red Army, leads the Red Terror. He's doing a lot of Lenin's bidding, but he is the Soviet leader in Petrograd. And Petrograd, remember, is what we call today St. Petersburg. He builds up the Red Army, the Communist Army, and leads the Red Terror, this kind of almost witch hunt, if you will, for anyone speaking out against the communist government. Part of the way they carry out the Red Terror is through the Cheka, the secret police who identified any opposition to communism. The Cheka were secret police who identified any opposition to communism. Oftentimes they would pay people off to be snitches or spies because they wanted to get rid of anybody who opposed or said anything against communism. Soviets are created after the communist takeover and the Bolshevik Revolution. Soviets are councils of workers and soldiers set up after the revolution. And remember, if the point of communism is for everyone an equal share of production owned by the masses, controlled and distributed by the government, that means that everybody should belong to a Soviet. So councils of workers and soldiers set up after the revolution. Russia's civil war broke out between the Red Army, the communists, and the White Army, the loyalists, because many were still opposed to communism, partly out of fear of the Red Terror and Trotsky, and just partly because they wanted a return to what they believed was the rightful leader in the Tsar. So Russia's civil war broke out between the Red Army, the communists, and the White Army, the loyalists, because many were opposed to communism. An armistice is finally going to be called to end World War I. An armistice is an end to fighting. It was agreed on November 11th, 1918 at 11 a.m. 11 a.m. So the goals of the Paris Agreement, they agreed to end fighting in November. By the time we get to the spring and summer of 1919, they are going to meet in Paris, and they have some goals to really have a lasting peace. But France and Britain wanted Germany to pay huge reparations. Some of the goals of the Paris Agreement were not aligned with the peace and what had happened. France and Britain wanted Germany to pay huge reparations, huge amounts of money, take all the war blame and guilt. So at the Treaty of Versailles, and this is in 1919, the peace agreement was signed to end World War I. The Treaty of Versailles was a peace agreement to end World War I. Germany accepted responsibility, lost a lot of land, lost some really particularly special land, and had to pay huge reparations. Germany was forced to accept responsibility, lost land, and had to pay huge reparations. At the Paris Peace Agreement, there was the big three: Wilson from the United States, David Lloyd George from Britain, and Georges Clemenceau from France. These 3 led the peace talks. But as we mentioned, I mean, Germany wasn't there, which seems like they should be part of the peace if they were part of the war. Russia wasn't there. They're in the middle of their own civil war. They should probably have been part of the peace, being the huge nation that they were, but they were not at peace themselves among themselves, so they did not attend. So really the three carrying out the Paris peace talks were the victors: Wilson, George, and Clemenceau. So they established the League of Nations. This was an international peace organization created by Wilson, but not agreed to by the United States. So at the Paris Peace Conference, they proposed the League of Nations, an international peace organization thought up or created by Wilson, but was not agreed to by the United States. The United States did not join the League of Nations. Part of the Paris peace talks, the beginning of the League of Nations, is when Wilson wrote his 14 points outlining a peace agreement. We didn't talk specifically about these points, but some of the bigger sticking points were the concessions that every country had to make. Everybody had to kind of give in. Everybody had to have a say in how the process would be, peace would be done. And the United States did not want a part of that. They did not agree to neither the 14 points or the League of Nations. They didn't ratify the Treaty of Versailles, even though Wilson wrote the 14 points outlining this peace agreement. The President of the United States wrote it. The United States, though, Congress did not get on board. So the results of World War I, several that you should list here. It was the beginning of new nations. After World War I, we get several new nations. Probably, I would have to say most importantly, Austria and Hungary split, and the beginning of Yugoslavia. It's the end of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire has finally, once and for all, collapsed. It's the end of the Habsburg Empire. That family, that dynasty that's been around for hundreds of years has now come to an end. It's the beginning of really true communism and the Russian Revolution. And it's the beginning of the League of Nations. So the things that happen because of World War I are very significant and are extremely important going forward. The beginning of new nations, the end of the Ottoman Empire, the end of the Habsburg Empire, the beginning of communism and the Russian Revolution, and the beginning of the League of Nations. Okay, so that's it. If you have questions, please email me. I'll put here at the end my copy of it so you can see if you want to probably just pause and take a look at it. There's page 1. There's page 2. The only other thing I was going to mention, there's multiple choice matching to essay. It's a 20 multiple choice, about 12 or 15 matching, and a couple fairly substantial essays. It's a total of like 67 points or something like that. So it's a larger test, a little bit longer than you might be used to, but this is a lot of information. So study up and be ready for tomorrow. See you then.